My father took away the family law firm I earned and gave it to my incompetent brother because a man must lead. So I quit, sued them, and destroyed them in court. Now he's begging me to come back, but I'm 26 years old. I graduated from Harvard with honors, passed the bar exam on the first try with a score in the 95th percentile. And my own father told me that his law firm was going to go to my brother Brian because, and I quote, a man must lead the family firm. Brian, by the way, graduated from a third-tier law school after failing the bar exam twice, and his most significant experience in the legal field was getting a parking ticket dismissed because he knew the court clerk. But of course, he has a penis, so I guess that makes him more qualified than me to run Donovan and Associates. The firm my grandfather founded 60 years ago and my father turned into one of the most respected in Dallas. The truth is, I should have seen it coming. I grew up in a house where my mother, Susan, basically didn't exist as a person beyond being Thomas Donovan's perfect wife. She organized dinners, smiled at social events, and never, and I mean never, expressed an opinion of her own about anything important. When I was like 12, I remember asking her why she didn't work, and she looked at me as if I'd asked her why she didn't fly to the moon. Your father provides for us, Rachel, she told me, and that was the whole conversation. My father wasn't exactly a monster either, you know? He wasn't the type of man who yelled or hit. But there was this unspoken thing in the house, this silent understanding that men made the important decisions and women supported them. Period. But I was always different, I guess. For as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a lawyer. Specifically, I wanted to work at Donovan and Associates. My father would take me to the office on Saturdays when I was like 8 or 9, and I'd sit at his huge mahogany desk and pretend I was reviewing important cases. I loved the smell of those old law books, the serious atmosphere of the conference room, everything. My father encouraged me. Actually, told me I was brilliant, that I had a lawyer's mind, that someday I'd do great things. What he apparently didn't mention in any of those conversations was that those great things didn't include leading his firm. Brian is 3 years older than me, and honestly, I don't know how to describe his relationship with work without sounding like a bitter sister, but the reality is that Brian never showed any real interest in law. In college, he studied business administration because, in his words, it sounded easy, and after graduating, he took 2 years to find himself, which basically meant traveling around Europe on Dad's money. When he finally decided to go to law school, it was because my father literally pressured him, told him he needed to have credentials if he was ever going to be involved in the firm. Brian went to Southern Methodist, which isn't a bad school or anything, but it's not Harvard either, and he did. Fine, let's say. Passable. Nothing special. Meanwhile, I was at Harvard, killing myself studying. I participated in the Harvard Law Review, did 2 summer internships at New York firms that basically never slept, and specialized in corporate litigation, which coincidentally is Donovan and Associates' main area. When I graduated in 2021, my father offered me a position as a junior associate at the firm, and I accepted without thinking twice. It was my dream, you know? Working with my father, learning from him, eventually becoming a partner, I thought I had it all planned out. The next 3 years were intense. I worked like 80 hours a week, took cases nobody else wanted, stayed until 3 inches the morning preparing arguments. I won 90% of my cases, built relationships with important clients, and basically became one of the firm's most effective lawyers. The other partners respected me. Clients specifically requested me, and I thought I was proving my worth. Brian, on the other hand, finally passed the bar exam on his 3rd try in 2022, and Dad hired him immediately as a senior associate, meaning a position above mine even, though I'd already been at the firm for 2 years and he'd literally just arrived. When I asked my father about that, he told me it was appropriate because Brian was older and needed a position that reflected his status in the family. What status? I wanted to yell at him. The status of being mediocre but having a Y chromosome? But anyway, I swallowed my frustration and kept working. I thought that eventually my work would speak for itself. Brian, meanwhile, was basically a disaster. He showed up late, lost documents, once literally showed up at the wrong courthouse for a hearing. The other lawyers at the firm made jokes about him behind his back, and more than once I had to save his cases when he was about to screw something up. My father justified it by saying Brian was adjusting, and that we all make mistakes at first. Sure, Dad, but generally after 3 years, you're not in the beginning anymore. Everything exploded like 6 months ago. It was a Tuesday. I remember perfectly because I had a meeting with an important client that afternoon. My father called me to his office, which wasn't unusual, but when I got there, I saw that Brian was also there, sitting in one of the leather chairs in front of the desk with that smug smile he always has when he thinks he's about to receive something good. My father asked me to sit down, and I did, thinking that maybe we were going to discuss a new case or something. Rachel, my father began, and he had that serious voice he used when he was about to say something important. I've been thinking a lot about the firm's future. Your mother and I aren't getting any younger. I'm 64 and I want to start delegating more responsibilities. So far, everything was going well. My heart literally started racing because I thought, this is the moment. He's going to make me managing partner. All my hard work is finally being recognized. I've decided that it's time for Brian to start taking a more active leadership role at Donovan and Associates, he continued, and I felt like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. Over the next 2 years, I'm going to be gradually transferring control of the firm to your brother. He'll be the managing partner and eventually the majority owner when I fully retire. I sat there, literally unable to process what I'd just heard. Brian was smiling more broadly now, clearly enjoying this moment. Dad, I finally managed to say, and my voice sounded weird even to me, like distant. Can I ask why you made this decision? My father looked at me as if the answer was obvious. Well, Rachel, you're an excellent lawyer, and you'll certainly have an important place in the firm under Brian's leadership. But at the end of the day, a man must lead the family business. It's tradition, it's appropriate, and it's simply how things work in our world. How things work in our world? I repeated, and I felt anger starting to replace the shock. Dad, I graduated from Harvard. Brian, failed the bar exam twice. I have a 90% case win record. Brian needs other lawyers to correct his work constantly. I've brought 3 major corporate clients to the firm in the last year. Brian lost a client because he forgot to file documents on time. And your decision is based on what he has between his legs? Rachel, your tone is inappropriate, my father said, and I could see he was starting to get annoyed. This has nothing to do with your capabilities. You're very talented, and nobody's saying otherwise. But there are certain realities about how family businesses work, especially in our field. Clients expect to see a man in charge. It's simply more natural. Natural? I exploded, and I no longer cared about maintaining composure. What's natural about giving everything to someone who hasn't earned it while ignoring the person who's literally sacrificed everything for this firm? I've worked 80 hours a week for 3 years, Dad. I've slept in the office, preparing cases. I've fought and won legal battles that most lawyers with twice my experience couldn't win. And all of that means nothing because Brian has a penis. Brian finally spoke. And believe me, his voice was exactly as condescending as you'd imagine. Rachel, this isn't personal. Dad is doing what's best for the firm. And frankly, I think you're overreacting. You're still going to have an important role. You'll just be reporting to me instead of being the one who, I'm not going to report to you. I interrupted him, and the words came out of my mouth before I could fully process them. I'm not going to stay at a firm where my work doesn't matter, where my achievements are invisible, where all that matters is having a Y chromosome. I quit. My father stood up immediately. Rachel, don't be dramatic. Sit down and let's talk about this like adults. There's nothing to talk about, I told him, and I realized I was shaking. But not from fear, from pure adrenaline and rage. You've made it perfectly clear where your priorities are. I hope Brian is everything you expect him to be, because you just lost your best lawyer to pure sexism. I walked out of that office and went straight to my desk. I had 3 years of personal belongings there, photos, books, that ugly paperweight my best friend had given me when I passed the bar. I started putting everything in a box, while my colleagues looked at me confused. One of the senior partners, Martin, came over and asked me what was happening, and I simply told him I was leaving, that I'd decided it was time to explore other opportunities. My father came to my desk like 20 minutes later, when I'd almost finished packing. Rachel, please, don't do this. You're upset now. I understand. But once you think about it calmly, you're going to see that what, Dad? I interrupted him. That you were right? That I deserve less than Brian simply because I'm a woman? No, I'm not going to see that. Because it's not true. And if you can't see my value, then there are other firms that will. If you leave Donovan and Associates, Rachel, don't expect it to be easy to come back, he warned me. And his voice had that cold tone he used when he was trying to intimidate someone. You're going to burn bridges. You're going to ruin relationships. Think about it carefully. I already thought about it, I told him, closing my box. And between burning bridges and burning my self-esteem by staying in a place where they don't value me, I choose to burn bridges. That night, I went to the family home to pick up some of my things. I still lived there, which I know sounds weird for someone who's 26, but in Dallas, it's not that unusual. Especially when your family has a huge property and basically expects you to live there until you get married. My mother was in the kitchen when I arrived, and when I told her I was leaving, that I'd quit the firm and was going to look for an apartment, she just looked at me with those sad eyes she always has, and said, "Why do you have to do this to your father, Rachel? Why can't you just accept things as they are?" "Because things as they are wrong, Mom," I responded, and I felt a deep sadness for this woman who had spent her entire life accepting a secondary role and now couldn't understand why her daughter refused to do the same. And if you can't see it, then I feel sorry for you. I packed my things that night, basically all my clothes, my computer, important documents, and went to a hotel. Brian tried calling me like 5 times, probably to tell me I was being irrational or something, but I never answered. My father sent me several text messages saying we needed to talk, that I was making this harder than it had to be. But I ignored them all. I was furious, hurt, and honestly scared, because I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay. I spent the next few days sending my resume to all the major firms in Dallas. My reputation as a lawyer was solid. I'd won high-profile cases, and I had excellent references from previous clients, so I wasn't too worried about finding work. What worried me was the politics of it all. You know? Dallas is a big city, but the legal community is relatively small, and my father was an important figure. I didn't know if firms were going to want to hire me if it meant potentially alienating Thomas Donovan. But it turned out my work spoke for itself. 3 days after sending out my resume, I got a call from Grant and Harrison, a respected firm specializing in corporate litigation. The managing partner, Alexander Grant, wanted to meet with me to discuss a position. I went to the interview with a mix of hope and nervousness, and Alexander turned out to be completely different from what I expected. He was like 50, very professional but also very direct, and he basically told me from the beginning that he'd been following my career and was impressed by my record. "I heard you left Donovan and Associates," he told me during the interview, and his tone was neutral, without judgment. "May I ask why?" I hesitated for a second, because I didn't know how much to say but finally decided to be honest. "Differences in vision about leadership and recognition based on merit versus family tradition," I told him, trying to keep it professional. Alexander nodded, and I could see in his eyes that he understood exactly what I wasn't saying. "Rachel, at Grant and Harrison, we promote and reward based exclusively on performance and results," he told me. "I don't care if you're male, female, green, or from Mars. If you win cases, if you bring in clients, and if you represent this firm with integrity and excellence, then you have a future here. Are you interested in that kind of environment?" "More than I can express," I responded, and I felt something relax inside me, something that had been tense for years without me realizing it. They offered me the position that same day as a senior associate with a salary that was 20% higher than what I was making at Donovan and Associates. I accepted immediately and started 2 weeks later. The first few months were incredible. I worked on complex cases, my opinion was valued in meetings, and Alexander was mentoring me in a way my father never did. He treated me as an equal, as a competent professional, not as a daughter who needed to be protected or limited. 4 months after joining Grant and Harrison, Alexander called me to his office. He had a folder in front of him and a serious expression. "Rachel, I have a case for you if you want it," he told me. "It's corporate litigation. A client is suing a firm for breach of contract and malpractice. The case is solid, we have good evidence, and I think we can win. But there's a complication." "What complication?" I asked. "The firm we're suing is Donovan and Associates," Alexander replied, watching me carefully. "And the lead attorney defending the case will be your brother Brian." I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. "Are you sure?" was all I could say. "Completely sure," Alexander confirmed. "Look, I understand this is complicated. It's your family, your old firm, and I'm not going to pressure you to take the case if you don't feel comfortable. But objectively speaking, you're the best lawyer I have for this type of litigation, and I think you can win. I spent 2 days thinking about it. 2 full days debating with myself, talking with friends, trying to decide what was right. On one hand, it was my family. And by suing them, I'd be crossing a line I probably couldn't uncross. On the other hand, they must have known something like this could happen eventually when they decided to value gender over merit. And why should I limit my career or turn down cases just to protect the feelings of people who clearly hadn't considered mine? In the end, I accepted the case. I told Alexander I'd do it, but that I wanted to handle it completely professionally, without personal drama, just focusing on the legal facts and representing my client as best as possible. Alexander agreed, and gave me total control over the strategy. The first discovery hearing was intense. I arrived at the courthouse with my team, all very prepared, all documentation organized, and then I saw my father walk in with Brian and 2 junior lawyers from Donovan and Associates. My father saw me immediately, and his expression was one of absolute shock, as if he couldn't believe I was actually there. Brian looked nervous, which was probably appropriate considering he was going to be defending a case against someone who knew all of Donovan and Associates' weaknesses. The judge called for order and we began. From the first minute, it was clear that Brian was completely out of his depth. He stammered, answering basic questions, lost important documents, and at one point cited a legal precedent that had been overturned 3 years ago. I, on the other hand, was in my element. I presented evidence meticulously, asked precise questions, and systematically built a solid case against Donovan and Associates for breach of contract and negligence. I saw my father looking at me throughout the entire session with an expression I couldn't fully decipher. Was it pride? Anger? Regret? Probably a mix of everything. At the end of the hearing, I approached briefly to say hello, because despite everything, they were still my family. But my father just looked at me and said, "I hope you know what you're doing, Rachel," before turning around and leaving. The case lasted 4 sessions total, 4 sessions where I basically dominated every interaction. Brian tried to argue points he had no way to defend. My father tried to intervene several times, but the judge reminded him that Brian was the lead attorney on the case, not him. In the last session, Donovan and Associates' client basically accepted a settlement that was extremely favorable to my client because they knew if they went to trial, they were going to lose definitively. When the judge approved the settlement, I felt a strange mix of victory and sadness. I had won. I had proven my point in the clearest way possible, but I'd also done this against my family. I left the courthouse surrounded by my team who was celebrating, and as we walked toward the exit, I saw my father and Brian talking quietly near the parking lot. My father saw me, and for a second I thought he was going to come over, but he simply turned around and left. That night, the Grant and Harrison team went out to celebrate. Alexander told me in front of everyone that I'd done an exceptional job, that I'd handled a legally and emotionally complex case with absolute professionalism. I should have been euphoric, and part of me was, but another part just wanted to go home and process everything that had happened. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Grant and Harrison's receptionist, telling me that Thomas Donovan was in the office and wanted to see me. My heart literally stopped for a second. I hadn't talked to my father since the trial, hadn't responded to his messages or calls. But now he was here, on my territory, asking to see me. I had him come into my office, which by the way was considerably smaller and more modest than his office at Donovan and Associates, but it was mine and I'd earned it on my own merit. My father walked in and stood for a moment, looking around, and then finally looked directly at me. "Rachel, I came to apologize," he said, and honestly that wasn't what I expected to hear. I was wrong. About you, about Brian, about everything. I sat there, literally not knowing what to say. My father continued, and I could see this was difficult for him, that he wasn't the type of person who admitted mistakes easily. "I saw what you did in that courtroom," he said. "I saw how you handled that case, how you destroyed Brian's arguments, how you commanded that room, and I realized I've been an idiot. A stubborn idiot, who let obsolete traditions and outdated expectations blind his judgment about who was really the most qualified person to lead my firm." "Dad," I started, but he raised his hand. "Let me finish," he asked. "Brian is my son and I love him, but he's not the lawyer you are. He probably never will be. And Donovan and Associates has suffered since you left. We've lost 2 major clients. The other partners are questioning my decisions, and Brian is basically being handheld by other lawyers on every case. I was wrong, Rachel. I was wrong about you. And I was wrong about what the firm needed. I felt tears forming in my eyes but held them back. And what do you expect me to do with that information, Dad? Do you want me to say it's okay? That I forgive you? And we go back to how it was before? No, he responded. And he sounded tired, really tired. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to offer you what I should have offered you from the beginning. Come back to Donovan and Associates, but this time as managing partner. You'll lead the firm, make the important decisions, and Brian will report to you if he decides to stay. It's your position, Rachel. It always should have been. And here I am, 2 days after that conversation, still not knowing what to do. On one hand, it's literally everything I always wanted. My father's recognition, the opportunity to lead the family firm, the validation that I was right all along. On the other hand, I've built something here at Grant and Harrison, something I earned on my own without the Donovan name, and there's something powerful in that, you know? Alexander told me that whatever decision I make, I'll have his support. That if I decide to stay, there's a clear path to partnership here, and that if I decide to leave, he completely understands why. My father is waiting for my answer. Brian apparently has already accepted that if I come back, I'll be above him. Though honestly, I don't know how he really feels about that. And my mother called me yesterday crying, saying the family needs to be together. I don't know what I'm going to do. Part of me wants to take Donovan and Associates just to prove I can do it, that I can take what my father almost stole from me and turn it into something even better. Another part of me wants to stay where I am, where they valued me from the beginning, where I never had to fight for basic respect. And there's a third part, smaller but insistent, that wonders if it's really possible to rebuild a relationship with my father after everything that happened, or if there will always be this crack between us. What I do know is this. I'm no longer the Rachel who stayed silent accepting unfair decisions. I proved my worth in the most public way possible, and now I have options, real options that I earned on my own merit. And that, no matter what I decide, is something nobody can take away from me.